Welcome to a special edition of Courtside Ballers in the NEC Sports Podcast. My name is Sam Frick, founder and editor at NEC Sports, covering schools across Northeast Indiana, Fort Wayne, Elkhart, and Marion, Indiana. I'm here with Mason Asher as we look ahead to regionals, which will take place on Saturday across multiple host sites in the state of Indiana. And just unlike sectionals, there's only one game for the regionals, and you win that one game, you win the regional, and you move on to semi-state. But Mason, we talked a little bit about this last time when we recapped sectionals, but what's kind of that impression now going into regionals as we now have seen the pairings, we've now seen where they're going to be playing at. What's kind of your initial thoughts, I should say, looking ahead to regionals?
Yeah, I think after we were able to kind of look at the regionals and kind of who's matched up a little bit more in depth, it makes me pretty excited for Saturday because I think there's going to be a lot of really really good matchups, and I think for fans going out and watching these games too, they're most all the sites have two that are going to be really good games. So from a fan's perspective, it's going to be good. The only downside to the fans' perspective is I know I've seen some talk about it is, they wish they could have staggered some of the start times a little bit more, but that's neither here nor there. But whatever regional site you pick, you're going to, be able to see two good games. And I think that there's a lot of teams still left, obviously, that, can do some damage.
That indeed. Let's go ahead and without further ado, take a look at those regional pairings. So unlike from our sectional preview, we're just going to go through the regional pairings, and then we're just going to break them down based on the sites and the games being played here. So going through John Harrell's website, we'll start off with the Bedford regional. I assume it's at Bedford North Lawrence, or I don't remember exactly which one it is, but either way, you have two matchups at Bedford on Saturday. Columbus North taking on Evansville Rights, 19-6 Columbus North versus 20-2 Evansville Rights. These two have never met before in the playoffs. They've not met in the last 25 years in the series. John Harrell has Rights up winning by 10, and that's a noon Central Time slot for that game. And then the 4 o'clock Eastern Time, Bloomington South versus Floyd Central. Bloomington South coming in 19-5. Floyd Central 22-3. These two have never met before in the tournaments. And the prediction is Floyd Central by 5. Mason, you're more of an expert in this area of the states. Just kind of take me through those two matchups a little bit more in depth, and what could you expect, or what should we expect on Saturday for both of these games?
Yeah, I mean, if you look right at Columbus North, Evansville Rights, the first game of the day there, down at Bedford North Lawrence. Columbus North had to come through a pretty tough sectional in sectional 14. And really their defense won that sectional for them. They beat East Central 40-28 in the sectional championship. Which was a pretty wide open sectional as we talked about. But yeah, Columbus North is pretty old. They have a lot of upperclassmen. Miley McClellan's probably the one on that team, that kind of makes them, roll. Kenny Conrad, Kaylee Harmon, Ava Wilson, Avery Johnson, Riley Sims. You could go up and down the roster. That's just such a deep roster, and there isn't anyone on that team, that sticks out to you as a kid who can, go off for 30 points. It's more of a collective effort, and that's what makes them really tough to beat this year. They as evidenced by the sectional championship game, they play really good defense, really good team defense, and will definitely cause an issue for not only Evansville Rights, but as they go deeper, if they go deeper in the tournament. Speaking of Evansville Rights, they're pretty much led by Bailey Hape, a really really solid senior, um, who can kind of score at all three levels. Gets downhill with the ball, but when she's on from behind the 3-point line, she's on. A kid that really stood out to me this year when I watched Rights was um, Ryan Wagner, who transferred in this year. And she's just a sophomore, but she's an athletic guard who can defend at a super high level. And I'm assuming will probably take on, the tougher matchup for Columbus North, whoever they, kind of look at and see that that's the toughest matchup for them. But then you also have, kids like Kendall Kaiser, who's a senior, Lexi Scott, um, or pardon me, not Lexi Scott, Kayla Mitchell, Kirsten Kaiser, Kendall Kaiser, as I mentioned. They are kind of like Columbus North, where behind Hape, it's a bunch of kids who can really score the ball. And again, they're a defensive team as well, holding opponents to 37 points per game. They got past Castle by 1 point in the sectional championship. So I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back because I did predict that Evansville Reitz would beat Castle. And here they are against Columbus North in what should be another really good game. Um, I would imagine that this one's pretty low scoring. I don't remember what the prediction was. 54 to 44. So this one's going to be a low scoring game. I would not be surprised if it, is a game that's played in the 40s. Um, much like both of these teams' sectional championships were. So that's going to be a really good starting matchup. And then Bloomington South and Floyd Central is going to be a really interesting one. Bloomington South obviously was really, really good last year. And then kind of their top player didn't come back. She was a foreign exchange student. She was just a freshman or sophomore last year. So I think they kind of maybe expected her to come back. But she did not. However, obviously, with IU getting a new head basketball coach, his daughter's pretty solid as well, and she transferred in. So Tatum DeVries is a junior there that kind of can really score whatever she wants to. But like those other two teams we already talked about, they just have a ton of talent. Julia Lashley, Violet Hall, Audrey Kraft, Rebecca Arnold are all seniors, so they're pretty experienced, and they've won a lot of games together. And then add in Tatum, and then Quinley Fife and Avery Schwartzman. Bloomington South is going to be, a really extremely tough team to prepare for because they have so many different scoring options. Um, and I think it's going to be a really fascinating matchup with Floyd Central because Floyd plays a little bit slower, more methodical style of play. Really leans in on their defense, but they have some guards that um, can really get going and score the ball. Elise Coleman's one of the best seniors in the state on the wing. Brindley Clark, another kid who kind of plays on the wing as well. And then they've got a 6'2" post down low, and Riley Roberts. And then Jaden Drury and Jessica Zarnecki are both really solid, forward type players for them. Similar to Bloomington South, they're pretty upperclassmen laden, and they're going to be relying on their experience as well. In this one, they ran through their sectional as expected, pretty easily after they got by Jeffersonville in that opening round game. And so they should they should be extremely confident in how they're playing right now to pull off a win. But yeah, like I said on the onset, these both of these games are going to be you know probably lower scoring games. But I don't foresee a blowout coming from either of these two games. They should be really good basketball.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I think that will be a very competitive sectional at Bedford coming up on Saturday. Shifting over to Belmont at TP in Decatur. Belmont, obviously, is one of the teams in this regional pairing here at Belmont. East Snowball and Belmont are conference rivals. These two have met back on December 12th. Belmont winning that match at 59-37. It actually was a lot worse of a ball game in the first half when these two met. I think East Snowball was down. I think they were down close to 30 points in the first half against the Belmont Braves. And that was a game where Marion Blakey had, I believe she had 20 points, 10 rebounds in that game for Belmont. And then you had Lainey French. She had some shots for the Braves as well. And the Knights did come back, cut it a little bit closer in that game. But ultimately, Belmont won big in that one. But when you look at this matchup, Mason, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit more about this regional here since I'm more experienced with these four teams. But East Snowball is coming off a 20-point win against DeKalb. They just repeated sectional champions for the first time since 1983. This is their first 20-win season in program history for East Snowball. They made it back to regionals for the second year in a row. Last year, they got destroyed by Norwell. I mean, they just could not take care of the basketball at all against the 1-3-1. And Belmont has kind of taken some few points out of Eric Thornton's system in the past couple years. You watch the way Belmont plays; they kind of play somewhat similar in some ways to what Norwell likes to run and develop their program. And so, when you look at the Belmont Braves, this is a team that is much like you mentioned with some of the teams from the other regional at Bedford. They have a nice couple of really talented kids, and then they have a lot of kids that maybe are not star players, but they contribute very nicely for the Braves. And when it comes to Belmont, Ashley and Marion Blakey really are the two big names for the Braves. They both average around 14 points per game. They're the two of the top players on that team. Ashley's more of a shooter driver for the Braves. Marianne's more of a post player, but can also stretch it out when she needs to. So Ashley's more of a guard. Marianne's more of a forward. Lainey French averages around 10 points per game. She's their sharp shooter in the team, probably their best 3-point shooter in the team. Annalie Krugerberg, nice scrappy player, really one of the better defensive players on that team, averages around 8 a game. Kate Barton averages around 8 or 7 points per game. And so that Belmont team is deep, but they also run a really strong defense that frustrates teams. They force a lot of turnovers. They play a lot of muck ball, if it makes sense, with the Belmont Braves. East Noble, they're a little more finesse, I think, than Belmont, but they definitely play a pretty tough defense. So you look at Belmont, their schedule, they took care of business easily against Marion and Mississauga in their sectional miss. Belmont's holding teams just 34.8 points per game. As for the Knights of East Noble, I don't know what happened there. As for the Knights of East Noble, they are giving up 44 points per game, averaging 54 a game. A little bit of a tougher road to get to regionals. They beat Angola, Leo, and DeKalb relatively convincing in those 3 games. And really, it was because of the play of Avery Amstutz and Ryan David. I think Avery Amstutz in that first game had 11 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 7 steals in that Angola game. And Ryan David's the all-time leader in three-pointers made at East Noble. They're both just juniors, by the way, at East Noble. And so one thing that's similar about these two teams, both very young teams, very athletic teams, and they both can drive and attack the basket. The biggest concern I have for East Noble right now is the Knights are not as big of a team as Belmont is a little bit. I mean, Belmont's not the biggest team either, but Marianne Blakey definitely makes it a little bit challenging for East Noble to score inside. But lately, they've been getting some production out of Addison Deming, right? And they've been doing that all year with Addison. She's been getting her production, but it seems like she has stepped it up. And then one player that's really contributed this postseason has been Shea Ritchie, who's been averaging close to 10 points per game throughout the sectional tournament. So I think for East Noble to be successful against Belmont, they're going to have to hit their shots. They're going to have to limit the turnovers. And then they're going to need some role players like Shea Ritchie to contribute evenly against this Belmont team that, frankly, can make you pay in a variety of different ways in that matchup. The other matchup we are looking at is Snyder versus Norwell. And you know this, Mason, because you saw what happened with Norwell in the holiday tournament at Snyder. These two met back on December 27th. This was supposed to be at Noblesville. Snyder won that game 73-61. And when you look at that matchup in the regular season, Snyder, they grabbed 31 rebounds in that game. They had 13 assists. They shot 38% from the floor, 54% from the floor, 38% from 3, I should say. And the biggest problem was, Janae Cooper had 33 points in that game. She is the sensational sophomore wing for the Snyder Panthers. 33 points, 10 rebounds, 5 steals, 5 blocks in that game against Norwell, and one of the top players in the entire country for her class as a sophomore. You also got Izzy Ecke, a transfer out of Bishop Dwenger, nice big that can play a little bit of guard, but primarily plays a small forward position. She had, I think, 15 in the sectional championship game against Carroll last Saturday. And then you got the White sisters, Maddie and Mackenzie White. Mackenzie is the more talented girl, the freshman. She had 20 in the Norwell game. She's averaging around a dozen per game for the Snyder Panthers. Maddie's contributes, but doesn't play that same type of role as Mackenzie does. And then got the sophomore guard, Mackenzie Carter. So at times with Mackenzie Carter, she can knock down some shots as well from distance. This is a Snyder team that can hit their threes. And so in that Norwell game, they shot 38% from downtown in that game on top of their size and length. So for Norwell to win this game, obviously, Mason, we talked about this last time, Norwell's going to need Vanessa Rossman to have one of her magical games again. She had 28 points and 6 triples against Homestead, despite the fact Norwell shot only 35% from the floor, and they had some trouble at times, handling the size of Homestead. and they only had 15 rebounds in that Homestead game. So I think for Norwell, they got to clean up the glass well. They got to take care of the basketball, and then they got to get Ross Worm and Salfring to contribute, obviously. But I think it's going to take a collective team effort once again to win that regional, because what happened in that Homestead game, while Rostrum had one of our magical games, and we know Rostrum's performance was magical, it really was decided by the role players of Norwell. Waldman hit that big three to take that lead. Then after Ankerbrook hit the triple, Waldman goes back the other way, feeds it to Olivia Green, hits the basket, draws the foul. That ended up being the game-winning score in that game. So I think it's going to come down to the depth pieces for both teams to win that game. They think Norwell is going to win by 16. I don't know about you, Mason, but I feel like that is going to be a dogfight of a ball game between these two teams. But Mason, do you have any additional thoughts about this matchup at Belmont?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the spread for the game will be a little bit closer than that. I don't think it's going to be a 15 plus point game. I think for me, Norwell's defense is going to be the key. In every game that Snyder's lost this year, they've scored 61 or less points. So for Norwell, they need to, you know, kind of almost solely focus on making sure Snyder isn't able to get out and run. And Norwell's defense, kind of does a really good job of making, teams kind of work the ball and putting pressure with their zone they run. And so um Snyder's going to really have to be patient with the ball, I think, which kind of leans more towards a low scoring affair. But if Snyder, as you said, if they're hitting shots again, if they're preventing from turning the ball over, but also forcing turnovers, I think the game is going to be a really really close one. I think Norwell does have a bit of the edge because Ross Worm's experience. She's been there, done that. She proved it last week. But you can't really look past Janaea Cooper, one of the best players, not only in the Midwest, not only in the state, but the country. So I think this will be a fascinating game between two teams who play contrasting styles, and I'd be very surprised if it's more than a 15-point spread at the end of the day.
Right. And I think, yeah. And I think when you look at that matchup, and one key thing to take away from the Homestead game, Norwell only turned the ball over 11 times in that game against Homestead, but they forced Homestead to turn the ball over 25 times. If Snyder's turned the ball over 25 times, they're not winning that game against Norwell. You're going to have to play pretty solid basketball and make some shots to beat Norwell, because their defense at 1-3-1 is very difficult. It's hard to beat Norwell when you're turning the ball over as much as Homestead did and then not make shots. That's going to be the problem in that contest. So I think it will be something to keep an eye on, is how does the Snyder backcourt able to handle the 1-3-1 of Norwell? Can they feed it to their bids? I think that will be something to keep an eye on. Boonville Regional. So this is down in the southern part of the state. Evansville Modern Day 20-4. North Knott's 18-6. Modern Day is 2-0 all time in the last 25 years against North Knott's. These two last met in the 2003 sectional, with Modern Day winning by 5. So Modern Day is 2-0 all time in the tournament series as well. They have Modern Day by a single point over North Knott's, as we turn into the other matchup at 4 o'clock Central Time. Washington versus Evansville Central in the all-time series, 3-1 in favor of Washington, but they've never met in the playoffs. These two last met back in November of this season. Evansville Central won that game in overtime, 69-62. They have Washington with the edge by 13 points. Mason, if you can, briefly talk about these two matchups here and what could we expect down in Boonville.
Yeah, so I was at the North Knox sectional semifinal game when they played South Knox, and I'll just kind of go out on a limb and say if they play like they played in that game again, obviously winning that game by I think it was 24 or 26 points. There's not many teams in 2A South that's going to be able to get in their way to make the state championship game as the South representative. They play really solid defense. That was on display last Friday. Lexi Primus is kind of the kid that makes them go, scoring 17.5 points a game this year. A Lipscomb commit. Obviously, as we see their schedule, they're ready. They played a schedule that got them ready for a run in the 2A state, tournament. They're senior heavy, with Primus. Jade Richter is a really solid post player who played great on Friday. And then Bailey McClure is a kid who can really knock down shots, scores double figures as well. For Evansville Mater Day, their team kind of goes as Izzy Like goes. She's a really solid, um, on-ball guard who can shoot the ball. She can get downhill and score with the basket. And then they've got just a bunch of really nice pieces alongside her, to kind of help her out when she needs it. But you always want to stop teams with a singular player who has the ability to kind of take over. You just kind of want to cut it off the head of the snake. And so I would be shocked if Lexi Primus is not guarding Izzy Like. I would be shocked if she doesn't make life miserable for her. Kind of as she did to South Knox and Kindle Hill this past week. Yeah, Hill had 28 points, but a lot of that was at the line. A lot of that was when the game was, kind of out of question. So that's gonna be a really solid and interesting two-way matchup. Just because I've been pretty high on Mater Day so far this year. But Harrell has them as a 1 point favorite. I would probably say North Knox should be the favorite in that game, just based on what I've seen. In the rest of the season, I guess, so far. And then 3A, Washington, Evansville Central. Both of these teams are very capable of getting to, Bank or Gamebridge, I guess, now, as a 3A South representative. Evansville Central's record, as I mentioned in our sectional video, their record's a little bit deceiving because they've played, quite a few games this year without Maddie Shirley, who's their best player and kind of, makes everything run for them. Um, but other than Maddie, like Olivia Hiles, a really solid forward for them, and then Carson Moore can score a little bit for them as well. So it's not only Maddie Shirley, but when Evansville Central's playing their best, it's going to be the Maddie Shirley show, and there's nothing wrong with that. She's shooting over 50% from the floor. She's the rebounder. She can push it up the floor if she wants to after rebounds. She's the one who kind of makes Evansville Central run, and they're on their schedule where they lost, whatever that is, 7 of 10 games or 8 of 10 games. Um, Maddie Shirley was hurt. So you can see the difference in how they play and what success they have when she's playing versus when she's not playing. And obviously in sectionals they didn't really have much competition for them. It's going to be a really fascinating matchup actually with Washington because Katie Reed is also a really solid forward down in the southern half of the state in 3A, averaging 17.7 points a game. Um, that matchup between those two, as we already have seen this year in that overtime game earlier this year, has the potential to be one of the best individual matchups of the weekend. Both of them can shoot the ball, both of them can score at the rim. Both are not afraid of contact down low. So that's going to be fascinating. But Washington also has, some other kids other than Reed. Shaylin Hawk is a really solid guard. Kyra Shuckman, Ella Williams, those are all just really solid guards who can bring, 5 to 6 points a game. And then for them, London Gilly is pretty important. She's their point guard, kind of runs the show, scores about 12 points a game. Um, you know, dishes off about 3 assists a game. So if Evansville Central is able to slow her down, I think they're going to have some pretty good success in their game against Washington. But again, both of these games should be, relatively close matchups, and should provide some really intriguing storylines as far as the individual player matchups go between the best players on each team.
Yeah, so another interesting regional coming up on Saturday at Boonville. We go down to Charlestown, state in the southern part of the state. Eastern Pekin versus Austin. Eastern Pekin 17-7, Austin at 17-9. In the all-time series in the last 25 years, Austin 17-13 against Eastern Pekin. These two met back in November of 16 of last season, where Austin won 56-49. They have a 5-2 all-time tournament series record against Eastern Pekin. John Harrell has Austin by 4 points. The other matchups at 4 o'clock, Silver Creek 19-5 versus Jennings County at 18-6. A lot of wins between the two coaches of these respective teams. You look at the last 25 years, Jennings County holds a 4-3 edge on Silver Creek. And these two met, I mean, they met like the last day of the regular season. And that was a 61-49 Silver Creek win back on the 31st of January. These two have never met in the tournament, however, which makes it very interesting. Silver Creek is predicted to win by 2, according to John Harrell. Mason, tell me about these two matchups here. Where do you expect with this particular field?
Yeah, so starting with the 2A matchup between Eastern Pekin and Austin, I think everyone kind of knows that to beat Austin, you have to stop Bryn Owens. She can score 35 points whenever she wants. Really, really solid kid who can score at all 3 levels. They've got some other kids as well on that roster. Kind of bookmarked with Bryn Owens and Allie Davidson, both seniors who kind of make that whole, engine run. Then as far as Eastern Pekin goes, they're kind of an interesting, group. They, kind of like every other team I've talked about so far, they're pretty, a savvy veteran group. You've got Sydney Burton and Avery Smith and Addison Smith kind of as the three-headed monster on that group. But then Bailey Robbins and Katie Hauner also, are bigger, bigger guards who can force the issue. This matchup for me is really going to come down to how well can they stop Bryn Owens of Austin. If they can stop her and allow her to score or hold her to score less than 20 points, then I think Eastern Pekin has a really good shot at winning. Just because the pieces, other than her, aren't built to score 40 points. But if Bryn Owens, is able to get going and kind of gets to her spots, and brings, her A game and scores 35 points, then, for Eastern Pekin, that's going to be a really tough, hill to climb. And then Silver Creek, Jennings County, that's just a really good 3A South matchup once again. Both of the last two 3A matches I've talked about have been really good. Silver Creek, obviously, it's led with Brooklyn Wren, who's going to Kansas, um, Emma Shane going to Vermont, and then Emily Robeson are kind of their 3 main players. But you also have Jocelyn Chesser down low, who, when I've seen him this year, she's been playing really well and just is, kind of another senior leader on that team. Someone who could kind of bang around down low, get the rebounds, and get it out in transition, along with Wren. Jennings County, I mean, it's I don't want to say it's a sole Molly Ernst show, but Jennings County really goes as Molly goes. So if you're a Kansas fan in Southern Indiana, this would be a great game to go to, considering both Brooklyn Wren and Molly Ernst are Kansas commits. But along with Molly, they've got Etta Young, who's a junior, and then also Aniston Kent. Both can pitch in, as needed here and there. But kind of like Austin, it's I don't want to say one man show because that kind of diminishes a couple of other kids who can score points and are pretty consistent at doing so. But um, Jennings County does go as Molly Ernst's go. She plays well, they win. If she doesn't play well, they don't win. So I would expect Silver Creek to, if Molly scores 25 points, but she takes 28 shots to do it, I think they're going to be just fine with that, and should lead to good things. So, the Charlestown Regional, is going to be 2 really good games. And I think, it's going to be a really interesting matchup between or for Eastern Pekin and Silver Creek, their defensive schemes to stop the best player on the other team, because Austin and Jennings County kind of run and go how their best player goes.
Yeah. I think that matchup will be very fascinating to see how that transpires. Going up to the northern part of the state, somewhat northern part of the state. I mean, I'm not too familiar with some of these teams here, so Macy may have to pull your weight a little bit on this one. But North Miami, I'll talk a little bit more about them because I did cover them a little bit, at least when we were talking about the Southern Wells sectional. And I mentioned about North Miami having a great program that they have. And you look at the record 17-8. Nathan Curtis has really implemented a North Miami program that's been successful in recent years, especially since they departed the Three Rivers Conference for the Hoosier North Athletic Conference. They won the Hoosier North again this year. And with North Miami, this is a team that's they're gonna play a much more of a disciplined, low scoring at times. It's gonna be much more of a disciplined, structured half court style basketball. Really gonna try to run the clock, be patient, and also rely on their heights. North Miami averages 33 rebounds per game and 7.9 blocks per game. A lot of North Miami's set success will hinge on their size, their post play, and the duo of Grace Sailors and Lainey Musel. Musel is averaging 13 points per game as a guard, a combo guard for them. She's got 3.2 rebounds, 2.6 assists. She really is the engine that gets this puppy going for North Miami's offense. Grace Sailors is their double machine there, 9.7 points per game. She's got 10.4 rebounds. He also averages 2.5 blocks per game for Grace Sailors. The other one is Kaden Donaldson at 8.6 rebounds per game for her, and she's averaging 12.5 points per game. And that's what really helps North Miami in this sectional to be able to get past Daleville and Northfield was their size, their physical presence, and their defense were key in that game. And then Southwood, for as good of a season they had, they were outmatched by their post presence, and North Miami just ran away with them. I think Dallas had 20 points in that sectional championship game at Southern Wells in that matchup. We had an interesting matchup against Fountain Central. This team only gives up 24 points per game, and they held Faith Christian to just 11 points in the sectional championship game. In fact, they have not given up 20 points or more in the entire state tournament so far this season. Will be interesting to see what Fountain Central can do against the size of North Miami. They predict Fountain Central in a 3-point low-scoring contest, 42-39. These two have never met before, so this will be fascinating to see how Fountain Central can match up the physicality of North Miami. And then the other matchup, Mason, a clear contrasting difference in the 4A match between McCutcheon and Hamilton Southeastern. Lillian Graves of McCutcheon. You got the studs of Hamilton Southeastern that's built a program under Brian Satterfield over the years. We remember what happened last year. They lost to Warsaw in semi-state as they were just so close to getting to the state finals. Kenny Holman really, I'm not saying she's the one that really makes it go for HSC, but Kenny Holman really is the star player for HSC that really is the spark of the team. But then you got Kayla Stidham there and Piper Brindley there. And, you got some key players on that team that can contribute. But I think, to me, for Hamilton Southeastern, Kenny Holman is the point guard engine for this team. She goes, and when she does well, HSC is successful. And when she struggles or she gets in the foul trouble, HSC struggles quite a bit more. Obviously, these two have met before, 11-4 in favor of HSC in the last 25 years. This is the first time they've ever met in the playoffs. These two last met on December 5th, 2020, with HSC winning by 23 points. But this is a different squad from that 2020 team. They have HSC winning by 6. Mason, I feel like those two games, the predictions are pretty spot on so far.
Yeah, I think for that North Miami and Fountain Central game, that's going to be a lower scoring game. As you looked over their Fountain Central schedule, they haven't, I think the most points they've given up all year long was 41. And they're young too. Fountain Central is a young team. They don't have any seniors on the roster. They're led by a 5'10" forward. So, that she's going to be the one that gives North Miami a little bit of trouble on the inside. Kendall Nolan, 5'10" forward, averages 11 points a game. The offense kind of runs through here. But then you've also got two other juniors in Bella Bacon and Henley Good who, average 8 or more points a game. And that's, pretty much their scoring. They get a bucket here and there from, 5 or 6 other kids. But those three are kind of the three-headed monster that kind of run Fountain Central. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they deal with that size because they haven't really, seen teams with much size this year. And yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head with McCutcheon and Hamilton Southeastern. HSC, you know, does go for the most part as Kennedy Holman goes. I do think that they have had a little bit of a I don't know what the word for it is, but so Kennedy was hurt earlier this year, and so HSC had to play without her. And I think having to do that during the regular season helped them quite a bit because now they know, okay, maybe we don't need Kennedy to score every single point for us or, go off for 20 points for us to win. And one of the sectional games, it might have even been Noblesville. I don't think she made a field goal in that game, and they still won by 13. So that just kind of shows you, how much Piper Brindley and Kayla Stidham and Ant Green, they have risen to the occasion. And I think Coleman's injury is a big part of that earlier this year when, they had to play without her. McCutcheon, yeah, I mean, they're going to go as Lily Graves goes. They won in a squeaker against Lafayette Jeff this past Saturday, where Maya Layton went off for 33 points, but they, kind of, that was a semifinal game, but they escaped that one, and then obviously had a little bit easier time with Harrison. But yeah, Lily Graves, she's scoring 17, 18 points a game. Kiara Lipscomb Allen, she's our point guard, kind of makes everything go. She's scoring about 15 points a game. Chloe Finney, Amira Gibson, they've got some kids who can really, score points when they need it. And then, Chloe Finney's kind of their, uh, you know, enforcer, if you will, just a really tough wing who isn't afraid of contact. So this is going to be a really fascinating game to see how HSE slows down Lily Graves. I think they can do that. They are built on defense and making things tough for the other team, and it it's tough to say, what McCutcheon is going to necessarily play like when they face a team like this because they just haven't faced anyone else in the state this year that's going to have the defensive intensity as Hamilton Southeastern with all of the um, talent and athletes that they have on the floor. But yeah, I mean, both of these games should be really close, really fun games. And as you mentioned on the onset, it's going to be a little bit of a contrasting of styles with McCutcheon and Hamilton Southeastern. And if Lily Graves is on, like they could pull the upset. But I would expect that Hamilton Southeastern, they've been through the ringer. They're senior laden. They want to get back to the state championship game, and this is probably one of their best shots to do so over the next couple of years.
Yes, and I think that matchup between McCutcheon and HSC will be fascinating. Now, here's a regional. I think it's definitely going to get your attention here at Greencastle. And you look at that first game, boy, is that quite the matchup in the first game at 4 o'clock at Greencastle. Indy Roncalli versus Indy Cathedral, one of the big rivalries from the Indianapolis area. But Roncalli has had the edge the last 25 years at 15-12. These two met last season in semi-state, with Roncalli victorious in that matchup, 72-54. They're 5-2 all time in the tournament. Roncalli is predicted to win by 9 points, right? And then the other matchup between Lawrence Central and Pike, again, two schools, a lot of history between these two teams. I believe they are also in the same conference. Yes, they are. So it's a conference rivalry. It's an in-county rivalry between Lawrence Central and Pike. You got Lawrence Central with another Lampley girl, a talented girl no less for Lawrence Central, and they've built a powerhouse. Just 2 years ago, they won a state championship just 2 years ago in Class 4A and did so rather convincingly that season and whatnot. And got Pike, who ranked right around number 1 all season long. You've been high on Pike all year long. Pike is projected to win by 6 points. Mason, breaking down these two matchups.
Yeah, so these two games, I said it last week, when we did the sectional wrap up stuff, and I think this is probably the best site for both games anywhere in the state. First in that 3A matchup, I have Ron Colley as my number one team in the state, and it's kind of interesting because Elliot Leffler is their only double-digit scorer at 18 points a game. And then after that, they're just really, really balanced with a ton of really good guards who are, about the same size, and they will run you, and then they'll run you, and then they'll run you some more. And then at the end of the game, you'll see Elliot Leffler with 20 points, and then there's going to be six other kids that have 8 points. And so they're going to, score a bunch of points, but it's all going to come from, one kid, and then it's going to come from, six other kids who have 6 points apiece. So they're really tough to defend. And with Brenna Cerny at the top of that defense, with her speed and athleticism, it's really tough, for offenses to get into the flow of things very quickly. And then for Cathedral, they have a sophomore who's really, really solid, in Caroline Wiggins, who can shoot the ball at a high level, doesn't make many mistakes, and has started to play really well over the last month or two. Here to conclude the season, and I had heard had a really good sectional showing as well. Maddie Watko, another sophomore on that team that's really good, along with Wiggins. And then, um, Tatum Triggs, senior, and then Princess Anuka is also, a kid who can really score the ball. She leads the team in scoring at 14 points a game. Um, so this game, is at top of my mind, just because I think both teams, if they win, they can beat anyone else in the state. Cathedral, got off to a rough start to the season, so that 20-6 record might be a little bit misleading. Um, but all Roncalli and Cathedral both played just such good competition in Indianapolis. They're always, ready to play whoever they come in contact with. And then yeah, I think Lawrence North or Lawrence Central and Pike. I mean, I've talked about it a lot already. I don't think there's much more I can really say about it. These two teams met already once this season, and I believe Pike came away with a win. I think it was 71-48, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I mean, I don't expect that to happen again. I think this is going to be a much closer game, as evidenced by John Harrell's prediction. But yeah, it's really a contrasting style of how they play. Lawrence Central kind of has a three-headed monster of Lola Lampley, Kiki Butler, and Anaya McKenzie, who kind of do the bulk of their scoring, along with Aubrey Ingram, who's a transfer in, and then Amaya Sowell, who is a pretty solid wing. But for Lawrence Central, it's really how can we maximize Lampley, Butler, and McKenzie touches, and when they're able to get the ball in space, they have really, really good success. And for Pike, and I've mentioned it before, but it's kind of crazy how many players play and how balanced the scoring is. I attended the sectional championship against Plainfield on Saturday, and they did not have a starter score a point in the third quarter, and I think they scored 17 in that quarter. So that just kind of shows you that their bench is just as good, and honestly, it might even be better than their starting lineup. They've got a ton of upperclassmen mixed with some really good underclassmen. Savannah Mitchell is a freshman, but she's going to be one of the best players in the state. She comes off the bench. Marley Jeffers, Kamari Booker, both are 6 foot forwards who, are super, super athletic and can cause problems. Alana Devine came from, I believe, Ben Davis, and she's a knockdown shooter who can get to the basket. I think against Plainfield, she scored 13 or 14 points. Sanaya Smith is a really quick guard who can kind of get to her spots. And so Pike is a team that can kind of beat you with honestly 10 different kids, and that's what makes them in their matchups so tough. But obviously Lawrence Central has the best player in the state, Lola Lampley, and that's got to count for something. As I mentioned, they did beat Lawrence Central this earlier this year by 23 points. I don't think that's going to happen again. But yeah, these two games in Greencastle are it's probably going to be the best regional site of the day between two, whoever wins these games could definitely win 4A and 3A. So it should be a really good day down in Greencastle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it should be definitely an intriguing matchup at Greencastle. We'll take a look at Greenfield, talking about Greenfield Central being the host of that regional. Heritage Christian 18-8 versus Union County in that first game at 4 o'clock. These two have never met before, so should be fascinating to see how Union County matches up with the battle-tested Heritage Christian Eagles. Pendleton Heights and Center Grove is the other matchup at 7 o'clock. These two have only met once in their history in the tournament. They have not met in the last 25 years. They have Center Grove with a 2-point edge, at least the prediction for John Harrell, as Center Grove is 25-0, looking to go 26-0 for the Center Grove Trojans. Mason, I'm not very familiar with these four teams at all right here, but what's kind of the assessment with the regional at Greenfield?
Yeah, so that first game between Heritage Christian and Union County, I think is going to be pretty heavily skewed towards uh, Heritage Christian. I know it only says it's a 10-point game, but I think Heritage Christian, just kind of they have more talent. I'll say that than Union County. I think in terms of experience, they have more experience. They have more length. Trinity Taylor is a really solid forward in the senior class. Riley Johnson's one of the best sophomores in the state, and then Elise Snively is another really solid sophomore for Heritage Christian, and they've really come on here as of late, made it through the sectional with Eastern Hancock and Triton Central, and was able to at times make it look easy. Obviously, their first two games weren't, tough whatsoever. But then, they beat Triton Central by 7, but really we're never in, peril of losing that game. Um, and have really battle tested themselves this year so far. And then, I just think Union County is just a year away. I mentioned in the sectional stuff that we talked about after beating Northeastern in the opening round of sectional. I was a little surprised, but they have talent. 4 of their top 6 scorers are freshmen, kind of led by Brooklyn Beck at 9.9. Against Northeastern, she scored 25, so it's obvious that she can step up in the moment. They only have one senior on the roster that plays minutes, but I just think they're so young. Heritage Christian is so battle tested. This is probably going to be, I would assume, a little bit of a shock to the system for those Union County kids. Now it's going to be really good experience for them because they're going to be, over the next 3 years, they're going to be back in regionals. They're talented enough to get back. But I think this first year, I think it's going to be a really good learning experience for them. They do have talent, but I think Heritage Christian, just plays much tougher competition, and I think will be, more prepared for this game potentially than Union County because they've played environments like this before. Yeah, and then Pendleton Heights and Center Grove is going to be, a really fascinating game. I'm actually really surprised that they have not played in the last 25 years. That actually kind of surprised me considering you know, they're not close to each other, but they're not super far apart. So I would have thought that they would have played at some point against each other. But Center Grove, hasn't lost yet this year. They are led obviously by their senior Grayson Gilliard, who has continued to just score the ball at an extremely high level, and then they've got kids who can shoot the ball at a high level around her with Hannah Jen, Mackenzie Pierce, Kennedy Kemper, Lila Tapak, and then Haley Wagner is also a really solid 3-4 who can help out along the perimeter, the interior, or can just kind of go and grab rebounds. And the matchup between Gilliard and Pendleton Heights is going to be super interesting to me because Ada Hupfer is one of the best players in the junior class in the state. Her, Olivia Jones, Aubrey Warfel, and Ellie Warfel, are a handful for anyone in 3A. And I think that between these two teams, the athleticism is going to be pretty similar, um, a- and the defenses are going to be both really solid. So it's going to be intriguing to see who can kind of, assert their will more. How much does Hupfer affect Grayson Gilliard down low? Because she likes to score the ball at the basket using her strength to get to the rim. How much is that going to hurt her? And on the flip side, if Grayson Gilliard gets Hupfer in foul trouble, that's going to be a big blow to Pendleton Heights. So that's going to be, I would say, a game that's played in the 40s, as I mentioned one of our previous things we did, Silver Center Grove wants to play in the 40s. Like they have no problem with that. They make winning plays during winning time. Um, and so Center Grove's going to be super happy if this is a 43-41 game, because they're more than likely going to come out on top. But if Pendleton Heights is hitting threes, which they can and have showed to do this year, that might put a little bit of fear into Center Grove with their zone defense that they play. So yeah, again, I think that first game, I hope that it's a close game. But personally, I think Heritage Christian, uses their experience and um, you know, ability to play in big games and um, stuff like that to kind of run past Union County. And then that second game, I think, really honestly could go either way. I wouldn't be surprised with either result.
Yeah, the thing that worries me about Center Grove is when you get to the state tournament at this point, you know that you're going to get the best teams coming at you. And if Pendleton Heights averages 61 points per game and they have that type of 3-point shooting, all it takes is a little bit of a run, just like what Norwell did against Homestead, and it could put a seed of doubt onto a team that hasn't really been tested to that level yet at that in this portion of the season. So that'll be something to keep an eye on as we look into that regional. And let's head over to Jasper. We got Evansville Christian versus White River Valley. I mean, the last 25 years, Evansville Christian has won twice. These two met back on December 29th, 2023. Evansville Christian won by 15. Historically, it's been a one-side series between these two teams. John Harrell thinks it's going to be a 25-point game. I'm going to be honest with you. This is one of those 1A regional matchups that it's a good team versus a team that got in because, well, they play in a more inferior sectional as opposed to Evansville Christian's sectional. I expect Evansville Christian to be favored in that game. I don't think we'll talk too much about that one, but just something to note there. And then Borden versus Orleans. I think this is the one I'm a little more intrigued. These two are pretty good basketball teams, especially of recent years. These two met about a month ago on January the 15th, where Orleans won by only 3 points, 56-53. They've met quite a few times over the years. They are tied at 13 the last 25 years. They met once in the state tournament all time. And John Harrell has Borden, the defending 1A state champions, winning by 10. I still think Borden gets it done. But Mason, kind of explain to me how Orleans maybe can make this interesting.
Yeah, I think, and again, like I've already talked about this a little bit during the sectional preview stuff. Yeah, Orleans did beat Borden earlier this year, but again, Borden did not have who was probably their best player, Ava Wheeler, as she recovered from an ACL injury. She's now back and makes that team a completely different team. So now instead of you know having to play against Riley Rarick, who's going to be probably an Indiana All Star in some capacity this year, and then some of their really solid role players. Now you're going to have to deal with Ava Wheeler and Riley Rarick, and they have. Really played well since Ava's come back. She's gotten back in the flow of things. AJ Mallard, Emma Hart, Sailor Schleicher have all been really solid for Borden this year, and they've got 5 kids who can really, um, can really score the ball for them. And then on the other side with Orleans, Callie Alston leads them in scoring at 17 points a game. Chelsea Ralph is also a double-digit scorer at 11 points a game, and then Kaylee Alston's a freshman, who scores 10 points a game. But I think this one really just comes down to Borden being fully healthy. If they're fully healthy, which they are now, I've said all year long that they're, the 1A South representative. And I don't think anything has changed, now that they're fully healthy. I would say Borden wins this one. I think they're well coached enough. I think that those seniors want to get back to play for another state championship. And I think they'll win this one by probably double digits. And then just quickly on Evansville Christian, White River Valley. Evansville Christian, it's been a really good team this year, led by Hannah Higgs, Bella Hall, and Hallie Higgs. All three seniors. They're senior heavy. This is the year where they're making their run. They're projected to win by, I don't know what it was, 20 points or something. I don't think that's going to be necessarily too much of a task for them to handle. And I'll be the first to admit, I do not know anything about White River Valley because they don't have a roster online, nor do they have stats online, and it's really tough to figure out anything about a team or who they have when that stuff is not online. But regardless of that, I think Evansville Christian, has their way with White River Valley, and as you mentioned, someone from that sectional had to get through to play Evansville Christian, and it just happened to be White River Valley. So this one, for the small schools, this one is going to be a really a good regional because Evansville Christian and Borden and Orleans, if they win, have the ability to make some noise with the ability to score the ball.
Mm-hmm. We're about halfway through these regionals. Shocking, I know. We head over to Jimtown and the historic venue and up in Bago in Elkhart County. And at 4:00, one of the biggest matchups in all 1A will come in the 4:00 match between Marquette Catholic and Fremont. Now, I said that, Fremont got into this regional because, they play in a more inferior sectional, but let's be completely honest. Like, Fremont is a really good basketball team. Let's not sit here and act like Fremont's a bad basketball team. They're 25-2 this year. Most wins in school history. They had that 16-game winning streak between November 15th and all the way to the conference tournament championship. Both times they've lost to Eastside by single digits. Both times, the 2 games they lost in those 2 games, they had Maya Turner in severe foul trouble in both of those games. That's been the only time where Maya Turner has been in real serious trouble of getting into serious foul trouble. And Maya Turner, by the way, just 20 points away from scoring her 1,000 career point, averaging 15, 16 points per game, averaging around 6 rebounds. She's really the spark of Fremont defense. They like to press under Fremont alum Shea Thomas, who's the all-time leading scorer for the program and for the school, no less. Fremont really took care of business in the section. Even against Blackhawk, there was really no jeopardy in that game whatsoever. Turner had 29 against Hamilton. Grace Charlotte averaged 21 points per game the entire sectional. I mean, she had 21 against, I'm pretty sure she had 21 against Blackhawk Christian in the sectional championship game, which was pretty much their toughest test by far against a Braves team that's young, but still a very tough team, no less for Fremont. They're going to be tested 100% with Marquette Catholic coming up on Saturday. This is the number 1 team in 1A. They have a top scoring offense, 63 points per game. They only give up 38 points per game. They haven't really been tested at all, aside from that holiday tournament in December, which they were playing against schools that are, 10, 5, 6 times their size with Westfield and Greensburg and Rushville and Northridge and whatnot. And then Lanaya Davis, 20.5 points per game for her, 2,000 points, approaching 2,100 points for Lanaya Davis. Marquette Catholic's really, really, really good basketball team. But if anybody's going to beat Marquette Catholic, at least at this point in the season, it's going to be the Fremont Eagles. But if they're going to be able to beat Marquette Catholic, they're going to have to protect the paint. They're going to have trouble doing so with their size in the glass. And this is a team that does not turn the ball over a lot. They only turn the ball over 11 times per game. And so they also force 12 steals per game. Fremont's got to take care of the basketball, and they've got to stay out of foul trouble, because if Charlotte and Turner are in severe foul trouble or Fremont's not hitting their shots, it could be a long night for the Fremont Eagles. But if they're scoring points, if Turner and Charlotte are involved, if they're hitting shots, if Marquette Catholic's going a little cold, if Davis isn't doing what she normally does, maybe this is a ball game. But I think, to me, he has Marquette Catholic by 18. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this is within the realm of 7 to 8 points. I think Fremont's got enough talent they can hang around with Marquette Catholic, although I do think they will be favored in that game. The second game is Valparaiso versus Northridge at 7:00. And Mason, you can talk a little bit more about Valparaiso, but when it comes to Valpo and Northridge, it's going to be the matchup between Lily Scholl of Northridge and Lillian Barnes of Valparaiso. You got the Ball State commit in Barnes, 2,000 point score, big, physical, just in your face type of basketball team up in the region with Valparaiso. Their defense is really strong at Valpo, only 34 points allowed per game for them. They absolutely they just absolutely demolished their competition in the sectionals because of just how strong that defense is for Valpo. Barnes averaging 21 points per game, 29 rebounds per game as a team. They average 15 steals per game. So that's going to be a challenge for Northridge, who, they came into that sectional shorthanded. And then, we talked about it when we recapped the sectional finals. Lily Shaw kind of woke up and said, I'm going to take heads against Warsaw in that game. And I talked to Coach Springer, just last night about that sectional championship game. And he said, look, Lily Shaw had an amazing game, but we don't win this game without the entire team putting that entire commitment to putting a game plan to win that game. They come into the state tournament without Cam Conley, who tore ACL about a couple weeks ago, and that was a heartbreaker. But he mentioned about Adeline Miller, Macy Reedsecker, who, by the way, is 6 assists away from becoming the program's all-time leader for assists in a season, I believe, at Northridge High School. He mentioned about Allie Ambers. Allie Ambers is a stat cruncher. She's a stat patter, not stat patter, but she puts the stats right, and she gets it. Whenever it's scoring or defense or rebounding or steals, Allie Ambers just puts up the stats and puts a great all around effort for the Northridge Raiders in that sense. Zoe Yater is a really good 5'10" post player for Northridge. And I mentioned Scholl, 5'10" junior. They got 3 junior All-States on that Northridge team. And last year, the last time these two teams met, it was in 2024 in that regional game in LaPorte. Northridge had a lead with about less than 10 seconds to go, and then Valpo made a basket right before the buzzer to win that game by a single point. Northridge has not made it to semi-state since 2017. I talked to Coach Springer about it. I know he remembers that game quite well. If we're going to look at those two matchups, to me, both games I think are going to be very exciting matchups on Saturday, but I think there's no question the Valparaiso Northridge game has the most potential to be one of the best games in regionals.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think your assessment of all 4 teams are really spot on. Fremont is the team in 1A North that has the capability to beat Marquette Catholic. Now, I don't know how great that capability is. And they're going to have to play their best game of the season, and they're going to have to hope that Marquette Catholic, doesn't play their best game. Because Marquette Catholic proved through sectional play that, they're going to score as many points as they want. But Fremont has, like you mentioned, and as you know that team really well, the pieces, the defense, to kind of cause some issues. And yeah, Northridge, this might be the team in the state that, you know, gets through regionals and then kind of makes a little bit of a run. If Scholl plays like she did on Saturday, and some of those kids step up and score some points here and there, there's not many teams that could beat, Northridge. And at this point in the year, throw the 19-7 record out of the window. No one cares about it. They have played really well in the games that mattered. They beat Warsaw, and I don't think really anyone, really expected it, to happen. Obviously, they have the capability to do it. But I don't think really anyone expected it to happen. But they're going to run into another really good team. Obviously, in Valparaiso, as you mentioned, Lillian Barnes is kind of the engine, behind that whole team. But then Delilah Kincaid, also sets the table well for them. Probably their second leading scorer at 12 points per game. And then Cadence Clark, also averages just under double digits. So it's not just Lillian Barnes that can really, hurt you. It's a couple different players on that team. But as you mentioned, it's their defense that, kind of rises to occasion. I don't want to look too much at the defensive allowed number particularly, just because, they've played some, they've played some pretty bad teams. But they held Warsaw to 60 points, which is a really good defensive effort. They held Crown Point on the road to 43 points. They held McCutcheon to 52 points. So they're able to hold these good scoring teams, you know, down. So yeah, as you mentioned, this is going to be a really good regional up north. And I think this Valpo Northridge game is really fascinating to me, just because of the storyline it provides. Will Valpo with Lillian Barnes get through, to semi-state, or will Northridge be able to get over that hump and kind of, make a little bit of run here, beating two really good teams in a row? Um, and then, obviously with the semi-state draw still to come on Sunday, you might be looking at a Northridge team that, kind of has a good draw and could get to next Saturday night.
Yeah. And I think both games could be very fascinating, but that Northridge Valpo game should be a good one. Going down to LaPel, so that's down in it's down in Hamilton County. You got Rensselaer Central. They made the state last year, 21-3, taking on LaPel at 21-4. These two have never met before. John Harrell has Rensselaer Central by 7 points. I saw them play last year when they played Eastside, and I mean Rensselaer Central. It's unlike LaPel. Rensselaer Central is very much a team where they have several kids that contribute evenly across the board under Wes Radke of Rensselaer Central. They play they play a pretty tough schedule overall for that team. They're a tested team. They play in a hard conference in the Hoosier Conference, and they're tough. They're physical. They're going to slow the game down. They're going to make you work for every possession. They're going to limit how many possessions you have. And defensively, they're just going to make sure they play a lot. They take a lot of pride in their defense. They're going to make sure you work for those points, you work for those possessions, and they're going to play physical on you. And so, even against McCutcheon when they lost by 6 points, they lost by 6 to McCutcheon, and you saw how McCutcheon plays. So when you're competing against 4A teams, you're definitely a team to not sleep on when it comes to that powerhouse of Rensselaer Central. And then on the other hand, you got LaPel. And when it comes to LaPel, I mean, you couldn't speak about a team with one massive name, and that one massive name is Lanaya Wills, the Butler commit. She is essentially she's the straw that stirs the drink for LaPel. 26.9 points per game, 12.4 rebounds. I mean, just an amazing, amazing player for the LaPel Bulldogs. I believe she's a 2,000 point scorer for that school. And so, I mean, that is just an absolute animal, a beast of approaching 2,400 points in her career. That is incredible for Lanaya Wills of the LaPel Bulldogs, who, just a couple years ago, they made it all the way to the state finals before falling at the hands of, I believe it was Forest Park in the state finals. But, I mean, Lanaya Wills goes, LaPel goes as Lanaya Wills go. And if they're going to advance in the state tournament, Lanaya Wills has to play well. And then LaPel's got to be able to withstand the defensive pressure of Rensselaer Central. On the other side, this is a game I honestly, Mesa, I have no idea what to expect. Because with McConaughey, they got a solid team, but the way McConaughey's competition is completely different from Connorsville. Connorsville plays a whole different section of the state, whole different competition, whole different conference. Connorsville withstand a really good sectional, beating Delta in the process. And so I look at that game and kind of a misnomer in a way where I don't know what type of McConaughey team we're going to see on Saturday. I don't know if McConaughey's season schedule quite compares that to Connorsville. So even though Connorsville's got the 19-7 record, I honestly feel like Connorsville's a pretty big favorite in that matchup. But Mason, what are your thoughts about this regional?
Yeah, you broke down Rensselaer Central lapel pretty well. Lapel goes as Lanai Wills goes. Sophie Goodwin can score as well for them. Kind of as a 3-point threat. But they play, kind of a pressing trap zone type thing, just depending on who they're playing. That puts the pressure on. And Nia Wills is so long and lanky, and reads the passing lane so well, that against teams that they play that might not make great decisions. She can get double digit steals as well. But Rensselaer Central, as you mentioned, their three losses are to 4A teams. They lost to McCutcheon twice, and then they lost to Lafayette Jeff. Two of those games were, I think, single digit games too, and the other one was a 16-point game. So, they're battle tested. They're led by Camry Rowland. who's a senior, 18 points a game. Courtney Matthew, who just committed to Illinois State as a junior, averaging 14. And then Brody Radke kind of down low as their, interior presence, averaging 11 points per game there. And so that game is going to be interesting in the way that the two teams try to attack each other, because both have their base like press that they play. But generally, when they play better teams who can handle it and have high IQ guards, they generally just fall back into a zone. Rensselaer Central plays a little bit more man than Lapel, but um, I think this is going to be a defensive battle. We just saw a defensive battle in Rensselaer Central's sectional championship game with Benton Central. I think the final score was 32-25, like super low scoring. And Lapel really, has struggled a little bit this year when they've played, the top 2A teams in the state. They don't play a ton of super tough competition in their area. So it's going to be interesting now that they're, on the state level of playing really good 2A teams to see how they do. But Rensselaer Central and Lapel both have, you know, a really good team, and it wouldn't surprise me if this one went either way. And then yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head with the Quantico schedule. Connersville has played the 70th toughest schedule in the state, and Connequa has played the 212th toughest schedule in the state. So there's definitely a little bit of a division there, and makes it so that you can't really look at the records, because as you look there, there's a number of 4A and 3A teams on their schedule that they've played. They're really balanced with Serenity Pennington, Anaya Bennett, Kendall Bottomley, Addison Jones, Kinsey Van Meter. They've got 5 kids who play the bulk of their minutes, but all can hurt you in completely different ways, and they all can shoot the ball. So you can't really have lapses defensively, or they're going to hurt you. And then for McConaughey, they've got 3 kids: Island Kyle, Delaney Betzner, and Addie Bellman, who kind of lead their team. They combine to score 35 points a game. That's about 65% of their scoring, but they're a really solid defensive team. They've struggled at times this year, facing certain types of teams when they've got athleticism. And Connersville does have some solid athleticism. I mean, Anaya Bennett's going to St. John's to run track. So like, if your point guard's going to St. John's to run track, that you're pretty athletic. So yeah, I think this is one of those games where Connersville is going to come in. They're going to be the more battle tested team, and they should, fairly easily, win. It's not going to be a blowout or anything like that, because I think both teams are fairly equally matched, but one team is just more battle tested than the other. And then that first game, Harrell has it as a 7-point game. I don't know. I think it's going to be a couple possession game that could go either way. But that's going to be, and I mean, Lapel's at home, so they're going to be, you know, they're going to be ready to play. They're not going to want to lose regional in their home gym. They're going to be comfortable. Rensselaer Central is the one that has to bus in and come play there. So that gives them, a little bit more of an advantage as well, just with the comfortability factor. So, yeah, that one, can go either way in my eyes.
Yeah, definitely that first game should be intriguing at Lapel. Going up north to Laporte and home of the Slicers, you got Andrean versus Bremen in this matchup. And Mason, these two teams have played in two completely different experiences this year. Andrean is the much younger team. They only have one senior in that team. Andrean, I mean, it's a pretty balanced team, but nobody scores more than 8 points per game at Andrean. And that is Lelione Slayton. I hope I didn't Staten, excuse me. I don't hope I didn't butcher that her first name there, but Andrean's the battle tested team. You know this, Mason. They play in the region. They play they play a lot of 4A teams and 3A teams. So the schedule, I think, looks a little bit deceiving for, I think the record looks deceiving for Andrean. I don't think they're that bad of a basketball team. I don't think they're necessarily the worst team out there, but Andrean is a very young basketball team that's going to have to play good defense. Now, when I saw Eastside play Andrean last year, they had a lot of trouble scoring in the interior against Andrean's defense. And that was only, the Eastside was scoring below, I think, I'm trying to remember what was the score last year in that regional, 39-27. Eastside didn't even hit 40 in that regional, and Eastside won 26 games last season. Andrean, only had 15 wins that year. So that was a team that was clearly a more tested team. The record didn't quite indicate just how good Andrean was last year. And even this year, more of the same here. You look at Bremen, 22-2. Bremen, I don't think has been tested a whole lot this year, but they have been playing some decent teams over the course of the season. I looked at that Tippy Valley game. That was a game that really, I think, kind of woke them up a little bit to realize, hey, we need to make sure we're playing, 4 quarters of basketball, be at our best for the playoffs. I think you look at that Northwood game. That was a good battle-tested, good game for Bremen to get things worked out for their game. And then you had that game at Elkhart Christian on the 29, where ECA, I think they hit 12 threes in that game against Bremen to help ECA win by 3 points, 46-43. Really got Bremen prepared for the state tournament. And even though they only lost twice this year, those 2 losses were 2 very meaningful games for them to get ready for the state tournament, even though they absolutely dominated the sectional, which we kind of saw that coming. When it comes to Bremen under Coach Robinson, Bremen runs a really they got size, obviously. You got Emma Kincaid, you got Eliana Grubbs. Grubbs, I think, just became the all-time leader in steals in Bremen girls basketball history. They have the winningest class in school history. They've won 3 straight sectional championships. Kincaid and Grubbs both have 1,000 career points. But then you look at the roster as well. You got Emma Lawmaster there. And then I think you got another Lawmaster there as well, the younger one. Tegan Feathers is a junior center there. And so while Andrean's the more tested team, and while they can play pretty good defense, I do have questions on how they're going to be able to defend the paint. Bremen averages 32.6 rebounds per game. Andrean, I don't know if they hit 25 rebounds per game. That's just the drastic difference there. Andrean turns the ball 18 times. Bremen only turns the ball over Mason 3.1 times. And so while Bremen hasn't been tested, they have been the more fundamentally sounded team. Both teams are balanced teams, but I think Bremen has more of attack, lethal attack with Lawmaster, Kincaid, Grubbs, and Feathers. And I mean, that's a dangerous lineup there for Bremen. The only time Bremen's really struggled is when they haven't been able to hit their shots. They've been a little inconsistent from 3, but when they've hit their shots, they're almost unbeatable. But when they haven't hit their shots, they can be human, which as you saw when they played Culver Academy's Elkhart Christian and Tippy Valley, they were a little more human in those games. I would say, to me, I still like Bremen. Maybe they don't win by 21 points. I would say I wouldn't be surprised if Bremen wins in the round of 12 or 13 points, just because Andrean's defense is going to at least keep them in the game for a little bit. And I think at least it's going to at least contest Bremen. But I think there's just too much athleticism in the Bremen Lions, and they're clearly the more senior laden team. The other game, however, I think is going to be more fascinating because of Penn and Crown Point. Penn's the younger team, but they got a stud freshman point guard on that Penn team. They're incredibly balanced. They're deep. They're a pretty tested team. Yeah, the NIC hasn't been great, but this team only gives up 28 points per game. They really live on their defense at Penn, and they have absolutely demolished the competition as of late for the Penn Kingsmen. But this is going to be a much different test with Crown Point. These two met in the regular season back in December. That was only a 3-point game in favor of Penn, 41-38. Crown Point is a little bit more of the experienced team at 22-4. Crown Point also plays some pretty tough defense as well. So I think you look at that matchup there. John Harrell has Penn by 3. I feel like that's exactly right. I think that it's a 1-possession game in that matchup between Penn and Crown Point. And I think, Mason, you can put a blindfold on you and pick it, and just kind of pick and choose which one's going to come out of that regional, because I have no idea who wins that game. So, Mason, your thoughts on that regional?
Yeah, I mean, you discussed it pretty well. So just in interest of time, I'll move through here quickly. I think you hit the nail on the head. Andrean, always comes in with a little bit lower of a record than what their talent, might suggest, because they do play a lot of those 3A and 4A programs. But Bremen, I think, obviously is the better team in that matchup. And also, with Penn and Crown Point, both teams, for the most part, are pretty seniorless, really. Crown Point's led by Ava Ritchie with 17 points as a sophomore. She had a really good sectional performance, and then Ivy Henderson down low and Ava Punak are both juniors for Crown Point. Jillian Sanderson, is now at Penn, the daughter of one of the Notre Dame men's coaches. And so she moved in this year from, I think they came from Kentucky, maybe. Um, and so that's been a big boost to them. Adding her to Alexis Werner and Olivia Dawson has been great. I think they're probably a year away from being a team that you kind of look at from a statewide level and say, okay, this team is legit. As you saw when you looked at their schedule, they've gotten beat pretty handily by Warsaw, Homestead, and Valparaiso as their three losses. So this Crown Point game, for them is going to be a good test. They obviously already played them once this year in a close game, so we'll see which team has improved the most throughout the season. I would expect it to be a little bit higher scoring, but it's really one that could go either way. And I think whoever wins it's going to have their work cut out for them in semi-state.
Yeah, I think definitely whoever wins that game definitely gonna have a big test in the 4A North semi-state. Let's go down to Marion and Bill Green Gymnasium and the complex then Marion. So beautiful place there. You got Carroll Flora versus Monroe Central. I don't know a lot about those two teams, so I do apologize. Although Monroe Central's had a really solid team at 20-2 for the Golden Bears. Monroe Central giving up only 30 points per game. John Harrell has that one by 7 points in favor of Carroll Flora. I can see this easily go the other way. I think this could be closer than that. Just I think these two teams are pretty evenly matched. The other game, however, I do know quite a bit about this matchup because that was one of our games of the week at NEC Sports. Oak Hill versus Alexandria. These two met back on January 29th, and that was a game where Oak Hill absolutely destroyed Alexandria in the first half. I think they were up as many as, 22, 24 points in the first half. And then I mean, for whatever reason, I think Alexandria just did not play well in the start of the game. And then second half, they really picked up their intensity defensively. Oak Hill probably played a little too tense in the second half of the season. And Alexandria cut it down to within, I think, 9 points in the fourth quarter. But I think the big difference in that game for Oak Hill was Cora Pond had a career game for Oak Hill, 17 points, 5 triples for her in that game. And you look at Oak Hill, yeah, they don't play the toughest of schedules in 2A, but they have been pretty good basketball team with the size of Brianna Daly and Morgan Cates. Daly had a 29-point performance against Wabash, 70-43 win there. And then she had a double-double against Rochester. I think she had, I want to say, 12 points and 14 rebounds against the Zebras in a 11-point win over the Zebras in the Central Championship game, a game to which Rochester had to beat two really solid teams to get to that sectional championship game. And then Alexandria, they have been, a team that just graduated Jacqueline Hosier, and nobody knew how good Alexandria was going to be. And they're a team that really is a team by committee in its core. Trinity Four, Leyland Dietzer, Grace Wood, Conley Davison. They're not big name star players, but they're really good Alexandria players for Mickey Hosier's team. I think for Alexandria to get their revenge in the regional round, they have got to shoot the ball much better than they did in the regular season. Alexandria only shot 28% from three, 5 for 18 in that game. They also turned the ball over 17 times in that game for Alexandria, as opposed to the 13 for Oak Hill. They're going to have to, and obviously for Alexandria, they're going to have to make sure they can slow down their fast breaks and able to win those battle on the boards, because the one thing Oak Hill has going for them is they're a big team in the post. They're a really physical team for Oak Hill under Carrie's squad. That would be Carrie Barcombe, former assistant coach under Coach Todd Law's years when Oak Hill won that state championship in 2019. They have Oak Hill by a point. I think it all just comes down to which Alexandria team shows up on Saturday. If it's the Alexandria team that's kind of dominating most of the season, it's probably going to be a close game. If they play like they did in the first half in that first meeting with Oak Hill, it might be a blowout. We'll see what happens in that contest. But Mason, your thoughts on this Marion Regional?
Yeah, I think, just speaking on that game, I think a lot of the game's going to come down to Landry Hardman for Oak Hill. I attended that first game of the year between Oak Hill and Alexandria, and Landry Hardman kind of had her way with Alexandria. The pressure didn't really phase her. She got the ball to the post. The post scored because Alexandria doesn't have, a ton of height down low. And if she's able to, limit her turnovers to, two or less once again, Oak Hill's going to be, a problem for Alexandria, just with how they can, kind of knife up and carve up that press that Alexandria runs. Which interestingly, they didn't really press or trap that much against Oak Hill, and I'm assuming it's highly likely it's because of Landry Hardman, and they knew that they would have a tough time, with her. And then the Carroll Flora Monroe Central game, is interesting to me because Carroll Flora was the team that beat Rossville, I believe, um, in sectional. But Monroe Central 20-2 this year. But they might have. I don't know how many high schools are in the state. I probably should know. But they might literally have the worst schedule in the entire state. Per Harrell, their schedule is ranked 371st. Again, I don't know how many high schools are in the state. I'm assuming that it's probably somewhere in that general area. And their opponents have won less than 40% of their games combined. So they have played a very soft schedule up to this point. However, that doesn't mean they're not good. And they're young too. They're actually extremely young. Their three leading scorers are all sophomores. Abe Irvin, Brindley Patterson, and Charlie Morris. Irvin and Patterson both average 14 or more points a game. Morris averages 6 points a game. Um, so they haven't been tested yet, but they're winning games pretty decisively. And you can't really mess with your schedule too much, especially when you're in a spot where Monroe Central is. Carol Flora is pretty experienced. They've been here before. They've had some really good teams over the past couple years. Jillian Saltz leads them in scoring 14 points a game. And then Maddie Isley and Eliza Reinhart both average about 9 points a game. They're going to be a little bit bigger than Monroe Central down low. So that could cause some problems for them. Um, but again, like their experience this year, they've played a tougher schedule. They have been tested in the state tournament where Monroe Central, was tested in the first game, but then the second game they kind of cruised right through that. So this is going to be a really intriguing matchup between two teams who um, are a little bit different styles of play, where Cal Flora kind of, wants to get it up the floor quickly and run, and Monroe Central kind of slows it down just a little bit more, due to their, inexperience at times. So this is going to be a really, really solid, two small school, games. Um, and that Oak Hill Alexandria, that game should be really packed. Those teams both bring a huge crowd, and I'm hopeful that the same happens with the first game as well. But these two games could go either way, in my opinion.
All right. I kind of expect this to be close between Oak Hill and Alexandria, who they have known each other quite often since Oak Hill joined the CIC in 2006. I want to kind of go through these next two pretty quickly here because I want to talk a little bit about the Warsaw Regional, but I really want to get through these next two pretty quickly. We're also going over a little bit of time here. So Shelbyville Regional, we have Tri versus Greenwood Christian. Tri and Greenwood Christian have played in sectionals. I personally think are a little bit mediocre sectionals. So kind of curious to see how this one turns out. They have Tri by 5 points. That seems about right. I don't really have an idea who comes out of that one. And then we have Tenley versus Lutheran in that one. These two met back in 2018 on December 21st. Lutheran won 40-21. They've never met in the state tournament. They have not Indianapolis, Trinity Lutheran by 11 points. And I would say Trinity Lutheran probably the favorite in that matchup. But I guess your quick thoughts on that regional.
Yeah, I think just quickly, I think Tri has the experience to kind of win that one. Greenwood Christian obviously played one of the weaker sectionals in the state and got through. But Tri, led by Jillian Chu, scores 16 points a game. Olivia Parham, who scores 11 points a game, and then Nakia Cridge, who scores 7 points a game. They have height. They can probably do whatever they want down low. And then I'm totally with you with Trinity Lutheran. They got two players for them: Marley Warren, who's a junior guard, and then Rachel Bondi, who's a 6'2" forward in the sophomore class. Those two kids kind of run things for them, and they've had a really nice season so far. But they have probably not seen the athleticism they're going to see with Tinley, with Chantel Shockley, who transferred in there from Warren Central, Ariana Hall, and Kayla Leaf. They're again a a senior laden team. All three of those kids are seniors. Leaf also is 6'2", so that's going to be a really intriguing matchup down low between those two teams. But I would expect that these two games are going to be fairly close. But I mean, I think there's a clear better team in both Lutheran and Tri in this regional.
Yeah, and so let's go ahead and go down to Terre Haute North in that regional. Park Heritage versus Monrovia, 18-7 Park Heritage versus 25 Monrovia. These two met once in the last 25 years, which Park Heritage won in a regional game last year, 64-44, and that's the only time they've ever met. They are predicting Monrovia to win by 8. Fascinating to see who comes out of that one. I know Monrovia has had some decent teams over the years, but so has had Park Heritage. And then you got Brebeuf Jesup. They have not made it past sectionals in a while. I believe since 2016 was the last time Brebeuf Jesup made it past sectionals. They've always had a tough sectional there, so they've kind of had to earn their way to get to the regionals against Northview at 19-6. Clearly, Brebeuf's I would say they're probably the more battle-tested team in my opinion, but Northview might be the better team, period. So I think that second game, does have a lot of intrigue in that regional.
Yeah, both of these games I think are going to be um, good games. Monrovia has been a team that's been on my radar in 2A all year. They had Brindley Hamblin transfer in, who's a 6'1" post from Martinsville, I want to say Martinsville or Morrisville. I think it was Martinsville. She gives them an added dimension that 2A teams are unable to match up with her size and length. And then you've got Zoe Walls in the sophomore class, Allie Talent, Grace Deaton. Basically their entire team are juniors, sophomores. So they'll be around for at least one more year. Same with Park Heritage. They've got some nice pieces here and there, but their best two players are Lila Busenbark and Berkeley Shelsky, both in that sophomore class. So this might be a preview, to come even for next year, because these two teams should probably be right back in regional with the youth that they have. And then I completely agree with you with Northview and Brebeuf. Northview, obviously hasn't been tested as heavily. But Reagan White is an excellent guard in the senior class for Northview. Carly Schrader is one of the, I would say, most overlooked, underappreciated kids in that class, in the junior class. She can really do it all. She can score it, she can rebound it. Really tough matchup problem at 5'10". And then Cambry Schultz for Northview, is also a really solid kid, who can pitch in 6 or 7 points a game. And then for Brebeuf, Robin Pate, Audrey Kindle are both seniors this year, have a lot of experience, have played in a lot of big time games. But Jalen Bowling is really the kid for them that makes them run. She can shoot it. She's, long, lengthy. The matchup between her and Carly Schrader are going to be really, really interesting. But if you're looking for a sec or a regional in the state that could provide, the two closest games, in competitive in terms of a score standpoint, I think, these two games could definitely go either way, in my opinion, and could both be, single possession games coming down to the last minute.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And just don't look at Brebeuf Jesup's record and say they're not going to beat Northview. I think that record's very deceiving there. This is definitely going to be a close game at Terre Haute North. Now, here's what region I want to discuss a little bit about at Warsaw. We're down to the second to last regional left here. So the Warsaw Regional, West Central, obviously I don't know much about at all. Both teams have not played tough schedules. Let's not sit here and act like West Central is the only one that hasn't been tested. Now, to Elkhart Christian's defense, they have been tested a little bit more, despite the Hoosier Plains Conference being. I'm just going to be honest with you, Mason. Hoosier Plains Conference is a terrible conference in general. There's just not very many good teams there at all. The second best team is Trinity Lutheran. That's how bad the conference is. But Elkhart Christian has played some pretty solid teams in their own defense, and Jason Gruen has really invested this program over the years with Elkhart Christian, really building a powerhouse with the Eagles. They had some close games this year. They lost only by 9 to St. Joe, lost by 8 to North Judson before they beat them in sectionals, lost to Eastonville by 7, only lost to Marquette Catholic by 11. That's number one team in 1A. And then they beat Bremen for the first time ever by 3 points. This Elkhart Christian team, they're an incredibly balanced team. They have 4 players averaging 10 or more points per game. Lily Maxwell, Mia Hibber is only a freshman. Kyla Yordy is only a sophomore. Ivy Clapsell is one of only 3 seniors at IHSAA. She just hit her 1,000th career point in that game against Trinity Academy, a conference rival there. Yordy, Hibber, Maxwell are all sophomores or freshmen. There's just not a lot of older kids on that team. So it feels like IHSAA may have a couple years left in them to make some deep runs here. This is a team that averages 27 rebounds per game, 16.8 steals, 14.5 assists, 12 turnovers per game. And this is a team, look how many threes they take, Mason. 171 of 539 from 3 for 32%. The only thing that worries me about IHSAA is they are only a 58% free throw shooting team. That does worry me a little bit in that contest. But when you look at that Bremen game, they were 16 to 46 from the floor in that Bremen game. I mentioned that game because that's one of the closest games to compare to, but they were 10 of 28 from 3. That's how dangerous IHSAA is. And that's the type of team that West Central is going to have to deal with on Saturday night. Now, I was told by an IHSAA source in that Culver game, Culver did a lot of nice things in that ball game to contain Elkhart Christian's lethal ability. So they really credit the defense of Culver community to make it tough on Elkhart Christian, that sectional championship game. But nonetheless, I don't think there was any doubt that IHSAA was going to win that sectional. I fully expect Elkhart Christian to advance. I don't know much about West Central, but I can honestly tell you IHSAA is one of the 3 or 4 best teams in 1A. The other matchup, however, is going to be fascinating in 2A. Whitko versus Eastside. Whitko has pretty much dominated all season long. They have not been tested really much at all. And if you look at Columbia City game, Mason, they were up by 7 or 8 points in the second half against Columbia City, a team that historically dominated the Whitko Wildcats, and they lost by 3 points to Columbia City way back to November 14th. They have absolutely destroyed the competition since then. And even in the sectional, they had a little bit of trouble with Woodland in that first round. Kyra Lowell had I think she injured like her finger or her hand, and she had to get that taped up and whatnot. And they had some trouble with their offense early on against Woodland and their size. They eventually got over that in the second half, and James Stonebreaker 21 points. The Bluffton game, I thought the game was closer than what the score actually was. Whitko, I think, was like 8 of 12 or 9 of 14 from deep in the first half from 3 against the Bluffton Tigers. Bluffton couldn't hit anything in that game, but because Whitko got cold in the second half shooting the ball, it was a little bit closer than that. The Lures game, Lures only got in because Harvest Green had 30 points and 20 rebounds against Adams Central. If she don't have that game, Adams Central's playing that game and not Bishop Lures. They had no chance against Whitko. The way Whitko presses and the way they run that defense, that 1-3-1 press, they get out and go. Kyra Lowell, the South Bend Washington transfers, are a really good combo guard for Whitko. And then the Stonebreakers of Jama and Reese Stonebreaker are just a really strong all-around 2 players for them. Jama might be one of the best defensive players in her class at the 2A state level. Whitko is probably just even better defensively than they were a year ago. And the thing about it is Whitko only has, I think, only one senior on that team, and that's Reese Stonebreaker, who's a 1,000-point scorer. Eastside's 22-3, but they've had to kind of work through their wins this year. They're a little bit of a different team than last year. They graduated some good players on that team, but they still have J.C. Kitchen, their point guard, and Taylor Mack has really taken off as a shooting guard this year as a junior, but they had to put in some younger kids along the way. But the Central Noble game, the championship game, they were down as many as 10 points in the third quarter against Central Noble. Everything that went wrong in that third quarter, at the start of that second half for Eastside, went wrong for Eastside. They were down 10. J.C. Kitchen injured her knee in the second quarter. They know how where JC Kitchen would be health-wise. She battled through the injury, but she was limping the second half. Eastside was in danger of losing that game to Central Noble, where Cadence Bales had 18 points in that game for CN. But then Adelaide Eldon, the senior for Eastside, I think the seniors for Eastside made it clear they did not want this to be their last game. And the senior leadership of Addison Moffler and Adelaide Eldon really picked up their game. Eldon with 15 points, Moffler with 11, Matt Chipton with 13. And those three almost single-handedly lifted Eastside past Central Noble to make it back to the regional round. A lot of this for Eastside is going to hinge on how healthy Lucy Kitchen, JC's in college now. Lucy Kitchen is the junior for Eastside. If she's 100% or close to that, maybe this is a close game. But if she's not 100% and they're turning the ball over and they're behind 10, 12 points to Whitco, I think the Cats win this game convincingly. This is a different matchup from a year ago. And so I look at those two matchups there and I say ECA is a heavy favorite. Whitco, maybe not as big of a favorite, but I think the Cats are at least somewhat of maybe an 8 or 10 point favorite in that game against Eastside.
Yeah, I think, you broke that down pretty easily. I think, for West Central, they're led by Emily Bunger, Sydney Mellon, and Macy Allen. But yeah, I think, for them, they're not as good as Elkhart Christian, who I think is probably pretty clearly, the third best team in the in 1A North, and would be, a capable team if, to get to the semi-state, finals in the South as well. They're just a really good team. But yeah, I think, everything you talked about this regional, these are your teams, Sam. So I don't have a ton to add, other than that little bit about West Central.
All right. So that's what it looks like in the Warsaw region. One more regional go at Winnemac. Kankakee Valley versus Fairfield. Kankakee Valley's had a solid program over the years under in different versions, but this time this is under David Wallstrud. Kankakee Valley and near the region area there, 20-4 for the Cougars of Kankakee Valley. They're spelled with a K, by the way. They only give up 36 points per game there. They have not lost since that match against Rensselaer Central on the 27th of January, which they lost by 9. Fairfield comes in at 19-6. They are led by Madison Jones, who averages 20 points per game, scored 1,000 points as a junior for the Falcons. Ava Herbert averages around 12 a game. She scored 1,000 point in the conference tournament. I think it was against it was actually against Fremont in that conference tournament semifinals. This Fairfield team, they run a very similar defense to what they had under Brody Darber when they won the state championship in 2023. They kind of kept that when Kyle Hartman came in from, he was promoted from the assistant boys coach to being the head girls coach. Kyle Hartman comes from Bishop Dwayner as a student. Now gets that experience at Fairfield as a head coach. He's been doing this for a couple of years now. And this sectional, when they went through, they had to earn every single game because Wawasee gave a good test with Fairfield. Northwood, obviously, their height gave Fairfield some trouble. And then that Tippecanoe Valley game was very fascinating because Valley was up, I think, 8 points in the first half. But Fairfield played gutted out defensively. It was kind of a sloppy, mucky game. Neither team shot the ball well. And it really came down to the last play of the game about 10 seconds ago. Fairfield drew a play from, they were trying to get the ball to Madison Jones, but eventually it went to a point where Macy Worthman went down to the right corner. They fed it to Worth in the right corner. She hit the 3 with 7 seconds left. And then they had a decision about whether they want to foul Tippy Valley or not because they had a foul to give and whatnot. They want to make sure that Valley doesn't have an opportunity to hit a 3 at the buzzer. Players at Fairfield chose not to foul Tippy Valley, and ultimately the Vikings turned the ball over with about a second or so left in the game, and Fairfield held on to win by 2 points. Macy Worthman's 3, by the way, that was her only points in that game against Tippecanoe Valley after having 11 against Northwood in the semifinal. So that kind of highlights what Fairfield is. They kind of play a gritty, tough zone defense. They're going to be physical. They got some height. They got some athleticism with Jones and Herbert. They kind of give you a mixture of a lot of different things. And I think that's going to be an interesting matchup against Kankakee Valley because of the way Valley runs defensively as well. But I don't know if Kankakee Valley quite has played the type of type of players like Jones and Herbert and the physicality and the size of Worthman around the post. And then you got Culver Academy's Highland. These are two teams that are epitome of great defenses. Highland has built a resume and a reputation for being one of the toughest teams to score on, and it continues once again. Yeah, their sectional wasn't great, but Highland has built a program of just a great defensive team over the years. I'm fascinated to see what they do against Culver Academies. Culver Academies is young, but they got some gifted kids on that team. They got some athletes at Culver Academies. They run a really nasty zone defense that even a team like Norwell had some trouble early on in that game. They had Valley had some trouble in that game. Clearly, Bremen struggled against Culver Academies. And then obviously they've had South Bend St. Joe's number. And anytime you can hold South Bend St. Joe to 50 points and you beat them by 7, that tells me right there you are a very, very good basketball team at Culver Academies. Mason, I think to be honest with you, Highland's going to be severely tested against Culver Academies and that zone defense.
Yeah, I agree. I think you mentioned that Culver has youth. Obviously, they're led by Lane Lyles with her 16 points a game. Piper Brum's a senior who adds 9 points a game or so. But yeah, I'll be really fascinated to see how they defend Highland defensively, because they don't necessarily shoot the ball that well. Um, I'll be interested to see if they try to pack it in or if they kind of, you know, Highland's leading scorer is Jordan Steele, and she averages about 24 points a game. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they play her because obviously, if you shut her down, um, you shut Highland's offense down. The next leading scorer is Avery Steele, actually, with 6 points per game. Um, Jordan leads them in 6 rebounds a game, leads them in assists per game. Just kind of an all-around player. So that game for me is going to be fascinating defensively. It should be a really close game. If Culver can get out and build a lead, I think for Highland it's going to be a little bit tougher, um, to come back on. And then yeah, that Fairfield Kankakee Valley game is going to be and a really solid game. But as you mentioned, I think Kankakee Valley might struggle a little bit, with the size of Fairfield, especially around the perimeter. Kankakee Valley doesn't really have much size around the perimeter. They have Olivia Adams down low, who's 6'1", but that's their tallest player on the team. There's not many other kids that they play in the rotation much over 5'8". So that's going to be, two kind of contrasting teams just a little bit. But yeah, these two games actually, for not being, uh, you know, the top of each of their classes, it should be two really compelling games.
Yeah, I just want to add a couple things for Fairfield. Ava Herbert's going to Huntington University, so you got a solid guard there with history of Fairfield's excellence. And Madison Jones, I mean, she is just an absolute beast of a three-sport athlete. Volleyball athlete there, basketball, she's obviously really good, and then softball, she can hit some dingers on the softball diamond. I think last year she hit 14 or 15 home runs as a sophomore last year in softball. So it gives you kind of a description of just how powerful Madison Jones is. She is an absolute dog and an absolute beast on that Fairfield team. And I think Kankakee Valley is going to be a little bit of a shell shots early on, having trying to defend that type of size of Madison Jones, because she's just such a great all-around player for the Fairfield Falcons. I think that's what makes that matchup so interesting. Last question for me, Mason. We just went through those regionals and we went through and kind of break down each of those matchups. What's the one thing that you're looking out for when you look at what's going to happen on Saturday, and what's the thing that maybe fans should be most excited about or should be looking at when looking at the matchups coming up on Saturday as a whole?
Yeah, for me, I'm going to be really interested to see which teams aren't ready to play. You don't often have a week break between games, and you don't really often play teams in a singular game on a neutral floor. Yeah, obviously you have holiday tournaments and stuff, but that's kind of part of a bigger, set of games, and you're there sometimes playing, staying overnight, playing the next day, or playing two games in a day. So this is really unlike anything a lot of these kids have done, especially if they haven't been in regionals before. And some of them even probably played back still when regionals were a two-game thing. And so for me, it's going to be after a week, which teams look the most prepared because those are obviously going to be the most well coached teams who have had a week to prepare. Who executes a game plan, and then for me, some of these storylines of I when we went through that, looking at Harold's predictions for the first time, there are only 2 or 3 games that look like they're predicted to be blowouts. So the wide range of outcomes for a lot of these games is going to be quite fun. Um, and again, like I've mentioned a couple times now with Northridge, like what team's going to be the team that makes a run? Is Northridge going to beat Valpo, make a run? Is Fremont going to knock off Marquette Catholic? Because as we know, they could if they play really well. Is Orleans going to beat Borden again? Which if that happens, both of those happen at the same time. That's really going to throw 1A, for quite a fit. And 4A North, with Homestead and Warsaw both going down last week, getting through regional is going to be pretty paramount for all these teams. And I think, all 8 of the teams left in 4A North are very capable of being there in Indianapolis, at the last game of the year. So, there's a couple storylines, but for me, it's mostly which teams are going to be ready to go. Because if you're not ready to go for the first quarter, then, sometimes the game can be decided early on.
Yeah, and I think the one thing you have to note this too, some of these games are being played at around 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. That's even more rare too, is you have that week off and you got to play a 1 o'clock game for a regional championship. That is very difficult to get out for. And I know that happened last year for Fremont when they played Elkhart Christian Academy at Belmont, and Fremont went ice cold in the first half shooting the ball. And then right there, I mean, it just set the precedence of that whole game. And then it just showed that ECA could play with Fremont. And I think Fremont just kind of was shell shocked. Even to this day, they still were kind of shell shocked in that regional game because of just how flat they were at the start of that game. And that really was the difference between the victory of ECA and the defeats for Fremont. So something to keep an eye on as well. Reminder for those that are listening to you for the first time, where can they find you in your coverage?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Mason H. Asher or at Asher Scouting. Either works. I'm pretty active on both.
Yep, and you can find me at ANC Sports. We'll provide coverage for the regional matchups, particularly those in our area in Fort Wayne, Elkhart, and Marion. We have quite a few of those matchups still left in our area, so be on the lookout for our coverage of regionals as we look to see who gets out of regionals and get ready for the 2-round semi-state next week. All right, with Mason Asher, my name is Sam Fred. Thank you for listening to our regional preview. Good luck to all the remaining teams in the regional round as they look to hoist another championship and extend their season for another week. So long, folks.